I have never heard the term deep ass dive.
I guess it does kind of suggest a saucy, maybe a risque nature, perhaps. I don't know. I don't know if this part's on the pod.
Thinking Basketball Podcast. My name is Ben. Welcome back to yet another episode, our first off-season episode, although it doesn't feel like the off-season still because of the rumor mill and the trade season, free agency, and Russell Westbrook plays for the Lakers, and I can't figure out what's going on. And then, of course, there's a draft. So to help hold my hand and walk me through it all, my unofficial therapist, the film the film aficionado of The Ringer, YouTube legend, dime drop, the one and only J. Kyle Mann.
What an intro, man. That was I feel like I'm in your debt for that. You really went above and beyond with your adjectives and calling me your therapist at
I don't know where
point.
it came from. It just came out of me.
I've heard that one before. You said something that is interesting to me. Did you have this moment after the finals were over? It took me a minute to like really actualize that the NBA season was over. Like it took me like a few days where I was like, wait a minute. Yeah, it was almost like going through some kind of I don't know, like we went on the Oregon Trail or something. And that's what it feels. It felt like that kind of a journey.
Yes.
Because the two seasons blended together. Was that your experience?
100%. And in fact, I realized in talking through this with someone I've mentioned it, I think, on this show before, it kind of was 3 seasons because one of those seasons had two big parts. So it was like we started in 19, we went into 20, we paused in 20. The key for a lot of people, but certainly for what we do, is we didn't know when we were going to start back up. So we're just sitting there waiting. I'm doing historical stuff, trying to figure out what's going to track forward. Then you started back up. Then there was no pause. And then we went into the second season, which was like the third thing. And that went, I think for, a while that was okay. But Seth Partnow had a great point a couple weeks ago when I had him on, which is the dog days of January were now like taking place in April and May, which was really, you're like, whoa, wait, March Madness is over and what's going on? We're on game 51 in like Cleveland on Wednesday. And then, yeah, I really haven't processed that the season's over, but it did get weird with like Euro tournaments going on in July during the NBA finals and things like that.
Yeah, I definitely had to take a beat there and realize what was happening or just fully compute. I know that, like, especially during you made a good point during the break during 2020. We didn't really like take like a full breather. Like it wasn't. We didn't embrace that it was an off season because we didn't know what was happening. We were like, it's just the new world. I mean, these are things we can tell our kids about years from now. But I know you and I both just started hammering the historical stuff. You continued to do it even into the season. God bless your heart. What a feat. I mean, seriously, I don't know how you pulled that off.
I still haven't recovered, so.
Clearly, you're blowing your nose. You need to go get tested, man. I think that's why it felt like such a journey. Is because you didn't have that break there. So I mean, I'm encouraging. I hope people will take some time. But like you said, that like basketball today, and we knew this in the pre-COVID world that basketball today does not stop. They've turned it into a year-round thing. But now, like the intensity of the actual schedule is weighing even more heavily, so it feels like I don't know, and we're starting back up in October. Or, training camp starts in late September. Is that what
Today's July 30th. I'm pretty certain we're starting up training camp in like a week or two. Yeah, that's my expectation. The draft was last night. We could talk about the draft. You of course have done an extensive amount of work over the years on the draft, and one of the things that I ended up finding your work years ago on YouTube was like these young players and these up and coming developing players. So, I mean, we could talk about that, but
are you curious about any of the players? You're not curious even just a little bit?
I'm not curious yet. But
Okay.
here's what we had bounced around before we started recording here, which was that I'm
Well, I'm
always
curious. I'm curious about this. I'm not curious yet. What does that mean? What do you mean you're not curious? Well, what's going to make you curious? There's
for me
nothing that
for
you,
me personally.
What? Yeah, you can't just skirt past that. What is it?
Well, this is what's going to happen. There's going to be like a summer league clip that I inevitably am drawn toward, like a moth to the flame, and I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to see some guy I don't recognize that pops on screen, and I'm going to go, "Oh, who's that?" And then it's going to be like the 6th pick in the draft or something. It's going to be Jonathan Kuminga, or I guess he was the 7th pick, but that's sort of how it ends up working for me, where then I become curious.
That's odd to me. You don't have any interest. Every basketball fan is
I am
different. I
strange.
know. I know. Every there are different little pockets. I know. I've sort of gravitated to a pocket of people who follows it as early as we can, and then all the way through. That's part of the fun for me. I start. It's part of the developmental. The evaluation process for me too, which has been an interesting conversation with people around the draft to hear people be up and down, because it's interesting that like a lot of people really do just intensely look at basketball through the prism of the NBA, and they're not interested in looking at the other stuff. To me, it's endlessly fascinating, just because I'm into development, though. And I know a lot of other people are too. I don't think I couldn't do it the way that you do it, though. But development applies. It just like the AJ Soprano's guidance counselor says in The Sopranos. Education shouldn't stop when school is over. So, I think that development continues well into adulthood. So I just look at it as a more end-to-end thing.
Well, when do you start, though? Because I feel like I'm going the other way. I feel like I used to watch as early as possible, which back in the day for me didn't give you a lot of access to high school. But you could certainly hear about high school players. The McDonald's All-American game was a landmark event. I don't even know if people watch that anymore.
It's a piece of shit. No,
Yeah.
it's not worth watching.
So things have certainly changed where you can have access younger and younger. But in a way, that along with the radically different structure of college basketball, even the different structure of international basketball, has sort of moved me toward I'm going to focus more on the NBA. But B, when it comes to development, I'm not going to spend as much time looking at 8th graders, if that makes sense. So, like, where do you draw the line when you go back and start to track players? I mean, I like some Amani Bates footage when he was like 14 years old, but
You're such a casual, man. It's you're
I
just
know.
casual. I hate hearing it. No, I mean it honestly starts. I don't go back that far. I go to like once the guys start to kind of play in like U16, U15, like high school. We have people out there that are sort of rounding the talent into groups and identifying prominent players and tapping those people as players to watch. I think once they get to the summer tournaments, once they get to the USA basketball program, we've got a pretty good idea of roughly who it is. Players will float in and out of that. That's kind of when, honestly, that's all I have bandwidth for. All the access to video has not entirely been healthy for me. It's kind of catnip. I know the other day, you texted me about my brunch and you were just grilling me. I tweeted a photo of my brunch. Ben Taylor out of nowhere, 4 time zones away, just starts grilling me about my brunch. He hasn't shown this much interest in anything basketball related in months.
this is the catnip for me.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Catnip.
All of a sudden, you're tweeting like Louisville brunch spots, and
I had to, man. I had to.
And just so my food nerds understand, he tweets a very nice picture of his brunch, but with absolutely zero descriptors. And that, to me, without even thinking about it, is like, oh, a puzzle. What kind of cheese is on those? What is that? That's a starch.
Gruyere.
What is that starch? Yeah.
Gruyere, isn't that how you pronounce it? It was Gruyere. It was polenta.
Gruyere.
Gruyere. It's starting to sound like Kendrick Perkins. It's trying to say Moses Moody. Anyway, Gruyere. It was Gruyere, polenta, and it had two soft-boiled eggs on it, and it had sour cream. Very good, delicious. Anyway, it was that. I'm saying that was your catnip. Youth basketball, not youth like middle school, but like pre-grassroots basketball is catnip for me.
16 years old, something like that.
Yes, and having access to going back to watching NBA players and kind of just tracking where they started, where they are, where they're going. That stuff's really fun to me.
Oh, okay, let me ask you something there. For me, another move away from that has just been seeing the difference between guys at 16. Like, think about the aging curve. If we track NBA players' careers, we have this aging curve of like, oh, they start a little rough and then they get better and then they hit their prime and they kind of roughly sustain their prime, and then at a certain age they fall off, and that varies for different players.
And my awareness of that stuff has gotten better because through our conversations, because your historical work has been so specific and has shined more good process, I think, into my process through, seeing your sort of evaluations of like historically where guys, the graph that you're talking about, that like, I even said it in my like J-League mailman. The
Ladies and gentlemen,
stands on the porch. I think he knows that he has to know.
That's Boogie Cousins barking in the background.
Lord almighty. Okay, so I think the thing I was saying was, even recently in work that I've done on like, draft prospects, I've thought about like, what is this guy going to be in the 26 to 29, 30 range because of our conversations. And I think those things help frame ceilings. And maybe other people have done that in the past, but for me, it's been much more about age as opposed to year in the league, things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I appreciate that. That's always good to hear. But I think what I've noticed over the years, and I wonder if you think this has changed. This is what I was going to ask you. Back in the day, someone being really good at 16 or 17 didn't necessarily dictate they were going to be good at 22. But the flip side is a lot of guys, and I think about this when I look at prospects every year in the draft, even from a distance, like I haven't done any deep dives on any of these guys yet. If you're 19 or 20 years old and you have like great athleticism, but terrible feel and awareness and all this other stuff, the odds of you being a really great basketball player historically are almost zero.
Yeah.
It's extremely difficult to be that old and because the difference between 15 and 16 and 20 is the physical maturity, both with your brain and your body. But if you're 20 years old, 21 years old, you're playing high-level basketball, this is all you've been doing for the last X number of years, and I turn on the game, and it's like, yeah, you're a great athlete, you can get spots, you can jump over people, but you're just not that good at basketball. It's extremely unlikely you're going to be really good at basketball when you're 23 or 26 or 29.
Yeah, the odds are against you. And I think some of our work kind of overlaps and kind of informs this a little bit too, because, we talked about like the sort of skill sets when they come into you, when they come into your life. I've thought about this a lot, even with my own son, trying to teach him touch, trying to think, things like that. Going to be thinking about that a lot more.
You're teaching your newborn child touch already?
I try to put him in the position. One of the things that I've been doing, I told you about this, is he has these tops that I'll spin, and I'll spin 3 of them at a time and at different spaces. I'm not like trying to like game my son into becoming I'm just trying to teach him like hand-eye coordination.
I think you are. I think that's what's happening. This podcast is about infant development in basketball.
What's it going to hurt? I'm not going to become the Todd Marinovich dad. That's not on the line here. Whatever he wants to do, in all likelihood, he'll hate basketball. That's fine. Whatever he's into, I'll be into it front row. So, but what I'll do is I'll like spin these it sounds so ridiculous saying it out loud. I'll spin these tops in front of him in threes to get, and I'll watch his eyes and his hands track them, and I'll try to get him to grab them. He's a year old. It's pretty fascinating to watch. But anyway, we talked about speaking to what you were saying about if you don't have those processes already sort of software integrating with your hardware at a certain age, it is very difficult, because in the box plus minus study that I've referenced several times over everywhere, reflects that, sort of the on-ball decision-making stuff. If you start from a very, very low point at your starting point at, let's say, a lot of the time it's 19-ish. A lot of the guys are 20 in the one-and-done era. When you compare it against high schoolers, they're 19. But if you start at like -6 BPM in your rookie year, and by year 2, if you're not up to like 0 or -0.7 somewhere in there, and these aren't just random numbers. These are real numbers historically. You're probably not going to be good, like you were talking about. And one of the big examples in this draft is the guy that the Warriors took at 7. I don't know if you followed this at all. Jonathan Kuminga.
I mentioned him earlier. Yeah.
Oh, did you? Did I brain fart on that?
You did. I said Kuminga at 7. I said the Warriors took him at 7. And I saw something about him came up on my timeline, and it included a handful of clips. Oh, and I know what it was. I actually watched KOC's video a little bit on The Void that like linked over there or something. So I got to see a little bit of Kuminga. And that's like me putting my feet in the water for a player, is I'll usually just want to get a quick feel, and then I'll start watching film if I'm more interested. So I think where you're going with him is this idea that he has great sort of, what do we call them, measurables at this point? Is that the term we're using? I feel like that's a American football term that's been borrowed, but the feel maybe isn't quite there.
Yes, and as we know, measurables at lower levels, if not guided properly, if not, you kind of need to have people putting you in good people guiding you in the right direction to put you in the position to play good competition at the right times. I've been watching the G League. I wanted to go into a big discussion about this in my video, but it was like 16 minutes. I had to cut it to like 13, and I was like, this stuff's staying. But I wanted to talk about, it's an interesting experiment, the G League, because how often are you going to get pro-level players, unless you like have a college program and you just schedule a bunch of exhibition games against like international teams? How often are you going to get your 18 to 21-year-olds in the position to play against these more mature, because a lot of mental maturing goes on during that time too, like you talked about. Guys at a certain age just flat out cannot focus for an entire clock. Like you watch a lot of these guys. So you stack the focus part of it up against, they just don't have the reps to know how to play zone defense off on the weak side of the ball, or where my rotation is if the ball goes here. You see that a lot with like Kuminga. He's definitely a guy. I've heard a lot of stories about like what Sean Kemp was like when he was younger, that he just would just bully people. Kuminga in another era would have been interesting because he might have been able to get away with a little more bullying, but he is a big physical not specimen. I've been trying to get that out of my.
He's a specimen.
Yes. He is. He's a great athlete. He's a guy that his feel has to come a ways, as we say in Kentucky. He's a ways away. So
here we go.
We'll see if he gets there.
When Kyle gets excited, he switches into his deep Kentucky drawl. So hopefully we can...
Deep Kentucky drawl.
Yeah, there it is. We can just get the entire podcast. That sounds like a cartoon character that I can't quite place right now. Can you think of anyone off the top of your head who historically really struggled with those things at even back in the old days, they would have been in college, but really struggled with those things at 19 or 20 or even 21, and then ended up becoming a really great player? I think it's harder on defense. The irony that everyone tries to pick out the next Draymond Green, and it's like that's the hardest diamond in the rough to find, because Draymond Green did he play all 4 at Michigan State?
At least 3.
He played 3 or 4. I can't remember.
I was going through, it's really funny that you mentioned that, because I was going through and watching footage, because there's been a lot of talk about Scotty Barnes, this guy from Michigan, or from Florida State,
yeah.
Who is sort of the other side of the coin from Kuminga. He's like a big physical, like great measurements, long wingspan. He projects as he falls into this, what I call a comp tractor beam, where like a revolutionary player comes along, and we just assume what we do when we compare to players like Draymond is we immediately reveal a fundamental lack of understanding about what makes them good. And you'll even hear pros do this to themselves sometimes when they talk about their career in the past. Be like, you had no idea why you were good.
Yes.
It's really funny. But Draymond's a really funny one, just because, he did have some good measurements, but like the great wingspan, the frame that could, stop up rolling bigs. But his brain was special. It should be studied by basketball science. And his wiring made him special. I was trying to think about like athletes like you were talking about. With Scotty Barnes, I went back and watched as much college footage as I could of Draymond shooting the ball at Michigan State. And then I went back and watched as much. PJ Tucker, who became like a mid-30s. I think he even hit 40% as a three-point shooter at one point with the Rockets, didn't he? Or am I remembering?
But he only shoots from the corner, so that's a whole nother one spot
counts.
On the floor.
That counts. That's spacing. I'll take it.
Sure.
We're not running him off of screens or anything. It's fine. But that's a guy who didn't shoot a three in organized basketball until he was like 24. Like that's a fact. So those are examples. I really think it comes down to the person. I heard Mike Schmitz make the point that like Jaylen Brown is an interesting sort of benchmark for Kuminga, a guy who came into the league. When I watched Jaylen Brown in high school and at Cal, I was just like, this guy just doesn't know how to play. Like he was a really, really insanely impressive athlete. The distance that he has made up, you being a masshole, could comment on this.
Oh man, ouch.
I mean, you probably paid pretty close attention to Jaylen. I've done some things on him here and there, but he came into the league with some real ball skill challenges. I think that
this is an understatement. Yes, I just would tell people the man cannot dribble.
Couldn't dribble at all. Tiny hands, but he's come a long way.
What did you call me?
Not you,
sorry,
never.
Keep going. Sorry.
But he's an example. It's hard to compare these guys on this front, though, because the person manning the ship really just makes an enormous difference. If the player is wired to be self-aware enough to sort of balance that like eternal insane confidence that it takes to be at that level, but also have the self-awareness to be like, I got to keep going back. That's really difficult.
Or understanding the process, being able to identify and then work through. So it was, oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on the name of the author I was listening to. I'm going to try to have his co-author on the show later.
Was
in
it
summer.
Malcolm Gladwell?
No, it was not Malcolm Gladwell. It was, I'll get it later. But he's also a consultant with the Warriors, and he was talking about when Steve Nash was there consulting as well with Golden State. He asked Nash about his development process. I think a phenomenal development story and process. Nash always good, when he was in college at Santa Clara, but the development he had through his 20s was incredible. And he said it was one of the only times, and he consults and works in all sports, hockey, I think football, like soccer, even maybe like a ton of sports across the globe. He said it was one of the only times an athlete had their own blueprint in their head. And he's like, boy, if it were only that easy. If you could just ask other athletes, like, how did you develop into this? Most of the time they have no idea. They have absolutely no sort of self-tracking. I think the fancy term would be the meta awareness or metacognition to like track their weaknesses and then their growth patterns and habits through them. But apparently like Nash had it all laid out. Nash was like, I don't know, my left hand was this, so I did this drill, and then for passing, I had the box on my head, and like, of
course,
those guys are one in a million, basically. One question I get all the time is, what is the best way for me to move into basketball as a career? Media side, analytics, whatever it is. And the single best recommendation I always have is Sports Business Classroom. Mike De La Rosa, the Thinking Basketball video coordinator, went through SBC, as did Rob Antle. He runs our community Discord and now works in sports. They are both alums of this program. And if you don't know it, SBC is an immersive program at the NBA Summer League, right in the smack middle of it, in the Thomas and Mack Center, that basically gives you a professional crash course in breaking into pro basketball. There's analytics instruction, film study, basketball operations, the media side, and it's a great way to network with people already working in the league and covering the league. There are former players, former front office members. They have former GM Ryan McDonough, Seth Partnow, Kirk Goldsberry, and many more. And I have a great deal right now for anyone interested in this. You can get $200 off with the promo code ThinkingBasketball when you sign up at sportsbusinessclassroom.com. It's www.sportsbusinessclassroom.com. SBC runs from August 9th through August 14th at Summer League. If you sign up before August 1st, you get early registration pricing. And of course, Thinking Basketball promo code will give you $200 off. Head on over to www.sportsbusinessclassroom.com. And as always, supporting our sponsors is a fantastic way to help support this show.
Of course, it's important too to think about environment. You know, people have talked a lot about Donovan Mitchell had a parent who was a professional athlete. Steve Nash, his dad was a semi-professional soccer player, if I'm not mistaken, or a pro, I think, right? Wasn't he a pro soccer player?
That sounds right.
How dare you not know that?
It's 2021. We don't need to fact check anything. They'll do it for you. They'll fact check us and let us know on the internet how wrong.
I'm sure they will.
Yeah.
There are people who remember adjectives that I used in like video titles. Megan and I were like thinking about the Jalen Green video we did, and I was like, I haven't used this adjective in a while, and we were like, nobody will notice. Somebody noticed and messaged me about it. I was like, what do you care? Anyway, so
you have a robust vocabulary.
just a little rant there. Sorry to that person. I mean, there are examples of guys who were good athletes that had the mind who already sort of had some of that, you know, we're just continuing to use the word software, had some of that like those early advantageous ball skill, development sort of tools at their disposal in their minds, like LeBron, crazy athlete, kept building. I think on some level, the American system is a good sort of construct for pulling this apart. And I think that the Ignite experiment is interesting on this level too, because you're talking about guys not having self-awareness. What I think about a lot is like in the traditional American high school system, you would have these players, not every single time, but you would have these players that would come up and just be so good, so much better than their peers, whether it be for like physical reasons. You think about like a Kendrick Perkins, grew up in this crazy frame, didn't really develop a lot of ball skills as he went along. He kind of was what he didn't really get dramatically better. And I think that the Ignite experiment is going to be a really cool test for that, because it's putting these players in a position to, if they're wired the right way, accelerate some of their understanding on all these different fronts. Yeah.
Are you kind of getting at the difference, though, between guided learning and kind of autocratic, that self-learning, self-driven kind of stuff? Because the old days, it was like, oh, I want to go to a college program. Kevin Garnett has talked about this, like which blew my mind when he talked about this. Yeah, he was deciding between North Carolina and Michigan, and they were asking him, and he's like, well, I wanted to go to North Carolina because they had the same defensive principles in my mind, head on a swivel, front the post, and I'm like, what kind of 17-year-old is walking around looking for colleges to go, like looking for college coaches and programs to play in for the defensive principles that they're attracted to? Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But, the question I think maybe you're getting at is, what kind of players do we get at 25 when one set of players has a guided learning experience, and what kind of players do we get at 25 when those same sets of players all of a sudden are thrown into an environment where they maybe need to drive their own ship more when it comes to their development?
Yes. And I think that when you're comparing the American and the international systems, this is a good way to kind of make that comparison, because you'll see some of these players, like we always go back to Luka. I mean, Denny Avdija is another type of player like this. They'll get picked up by these clubs at a really young age. Sometimes it'll be 10, 11, 12 years old. But we can't do that I was talking earlier about like identifying players in like 8th grade and things like that, and we sort of just kind of herd them into groups, and then we figure out who are the most special players, and we pluck those guys and give them the most attention and things like that, because you can't put every 16-year-old on the men's team, and we can't run 5 16-year-olds out there at the same time and let them run against what
25-year-old men,
ex Euro League team, whatever,
right.
25, 35. We can't. Yeah. You can't really do that. So I think that the G League is an interesting thing on that front, because the teammates are really funny too in that experiment. You should check it out. Bobby Brown is still out there putting around, playing with Jalen Green. Jarrett Jack, who seems to look more like Cuba Gooding Jr. by the day when I was watching the game. But I thought it was Cuba Gooding Jr. at first in just a jersey, but sorry, that was a little digression.
Wait, can we grade an old draft? Can we do that?
I was flipping through drafts as you were saying that.
2016. Can we do it?
Yeah, let me go forward.
Because for me, I've said this before, so we might as well like put our money where our mouth is. I feel like the next day grading of the draft, it might be fun for people. So don't let me, think that I'm saying it shouldn't be fun. People can do that. But from an accuracy standpoint, from an information game standpoint, we don't really get anything the next day. That kind of is part of your question earlier to me about what gets me interested. I'm not necessarily curious about a guy at this stage being drafted, but as he starts to develop and as he's on a team, then we get a clearer picture of what's moving forward. And a lot of these draft grades are, hey, I'm doing my best as a scout, as a quote unquote draft guy, and then I'm trying to map that up to what the team needs. But there's so many uncertainties. There's uncertainties for years. So I was trying to go back and think, like, what would be the first draft that would be fun and reasonable for us to do this with? The 2016 draft, of course, is the Ben Simmons draft. We just talked about Jaylen Brown. You have it up. You want to do that one? You want to do another one?
I have that pulled up. I'm seeing a lot of tough picks in this one. I think like 12 or 13 of the first round are like not currently productive NBA players.
Right. And then so you think about sort of the grades that are given to them. We have I'm just going to pull up CBS Sports' grades. I'm also not going to say who did this because they're a friend of the show. But we could pick anyone. It doesn't matter. All these grades are usually going to be kind of similar. Can we clarify up front too? We know why we do it.
We know why we do the grades. I'm just going to say that up front.
For clicks?
It's a business. We're running a business here. Did you want me to say my thing on this or what?
I don't know. You can if you want. I know
Are you walking me there and just seeing if I wanted to say it or not?
Whatever you want to let the public know. I know you have possibly a rant on this that you may or may not want to get off.
I'm not going to rant. Grades are just funny. I mean, it's just funny. We go by. It's just funny to grade a decision before it has played out. Like it's just an odd thing. Like I don't know. Like where else in life would we do that in a credible way? It's a lot of the time it just reflects our personal evals. Maybe somebody reached up. I'm not going to say it's never smart to there are some reaches that are like, what are they thinking? But a lot of the time we're judging things that haven't played out yet and just kind of reflecting our big boards onto these teams that made decisions.
Yeah, and I think it's what's a little strange about it or difficult to do really is I've heard people say, well, okay, Kyle, we don't know what's going to happen in 5 years, but we can grade their decision-making process now. And I'm like, that breaks for me a little bit because the decision-making process is based on their projection of the player. And it's also based on information that they have that you don't have. Mm-hmm. So that's where I have a hard time with the next day grading of kind of drafts. So anyway, I don't want to steal your thunder on your rant.
No, a lot of like front office coaching. I feel that way about a lot of front office or coaching things. I just think whenever we go into criticisms of this type, I think that we should hold people accountable to be really specific and not just throw out random like this coach, this GM, this person's an idiot. Well, be specific. That's really easy to do. I'm just saying the day after a draft, you have no clue all the just kind of alchemy that goes into and information they have, good or bad. I just that's kind of my feeling on that stuff.
So let's look at this draft. The first pick in the draft, unless you don't want to, we don't have to.
We can look.
Okay. Ben Simmons was the first pick.
Looking back, do you think he should have been the first pick? Is that kind of where you want to do this?
We don't have to go through the whole draft, but just the big notes, I think, is how I would think of doing it. Like I don't know if I would take Simmons first in a redraft per se, but I think that's a perfectly reasonable first pick, even with the hindsight that we have, right?
I think so. I mean, you're talking about a guy who is one of the most versatile defenders in the league. I think he's horribly misoptimized. It's just such an odd situation that he's in. And it's been really funny to hear this back and forth between. I think NBA teams know that he has. There is a world out there where he could be more effective in a winning environment. Trying to like dial in the value and get like a. I was saying this last night. Trying to dial in the value and try to get the best return you could possibly get while having this conversation that's very ugly about how he's performed in Philly's system. I don't admire Daryl Morey for navigating that. That sounds like a nightmare because, trading James Harden, you're just like, what this is. We don't need to even have a conversation about it. But he's probably arguing a lot with people about what Ben Simmons is, I would imagine. Wouldn't you think?
You mean trying to convince them?
Well, yeah. But I think there are teams out there that are probably sandbagging and they know deep down that he is something. I mean, that there are – it's just – he's such a the thing I've been saying a lot lately is he just has kind of conditional impact that people have a hard time getting past.
Sure. But the market is also an issue because he's a flawed player who has a handful of big strengths and a handful of big weaknesses. And so you have to take into account his price, and then you have to take into account where you are as a team. And then if you are in a position as a team to kind of compete, how does he fit? Because his weaknesses can create big fit problems. So I think there's a lot probably going on in this situation that makes it more complex to get a good deal done than just like, is Simmons really an all NBA player or is he kind of not that good? Something like that.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing when I'm looking at this particular draft is if you kind of scroll down through, I mean, there are players that projected to fit certain archetypes that just didn't. I mean, Dragan Bender, I think, fit the archetype of, okay, here's a big – I think he was just misevaluated, honestly, at the end of the day, because the stuff, it just wasn't there. But and maybe I'm sort of like contradicting what I said before, but he – right there. I mean, the Chris Dunn, I always thought that Minnesota should have taken Jamal Murray there. I thought that was a weird pick.
Hold on. Yeah. You're going too fast. Okay. So Simmons, I want to get some of the grades on these guys. I'm looking at CBS Sports, Bleacher Report, Forbes, and USA Today. They all give the Simmons pick an A.
Yes.
Then we have Brandon Ingram second, who we haven't talked about. And refresh my memory. Were people saying Ingram could have been the first pick?
At the time,
or did Simmons kind of run away with it?
I think Simmons ran away with it because at the time, I think people were going wild with the Simmons stuff. I mean, there were people saying stuff like this guy's kind of LeBron-y, LeBron-esque, LeBron-ish. I feel like Ingram was pretty solidly behind him in that conversation, if I remember correctly. Of course, that's been 5 years ago.
Okay, so he gets an A, an A, an A, and an A plus for the Lakers taking him second. And then Jaylen Brown went third, who we alluded to earlier. And
well, this is a good example. Well, go ahead say what you were going to say.
Jaylen Brown, he gets a B minus, a B minus, a B. Are these all B minuses? A B plus. There's a B plus in here, and another B plus. So he's considered. So you got those first two picks. Everyone seems to love them at the time, and then you get to Jaylen, and some of what we were talking about earlier applies here. And people are like, "Oh, the Jaylen Brown pick." Maybe not really as good of a pick.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I remember specifically, I wasn't like covering the draft intently at the time. I was like working in another industry, but I thought it was a horrible pick at the time. I thought that it was a weird pick, but I think that kind of ties back to taking in all the kind of the data surrounding development at that age range.
Yes.
If you feel like you can project. That this person could add these things in the time frame that you're going to have them, are they a worthy investment based on what their ceiling is going to be at 25, 26, 27? Then it makes more sense. So, but that's kind of where I'm going with that. That the next day you can't always see those things.
Well, it's hard to capture what it's like to work out with a guy and have a conversation with him and feel like he vibes with your coaching, with your philosophy, with you as a general manager or owner or whatever it is, whoever is the stakeholder making that decision, and thinking. I mean, we now get this 2020 hindsight with Jaylen Brown because he's become a star and he's been in the spotlight more. But you might sit down with someone like that and go, oh, huh, not only does he fit the culture, but I see a development path because he seems like he's wiser beyond his years, he's mature, something like that. And so maybe those things I'm seeing on film where he doesn't have a handle or his feel on the weak side. Now, he still doesn't have great vision or feel on defense, but the to your point, you start as a -6 and you get up to a +2. That's a hell of a lot of miles to cover on something that's a weakness. And then meanwhile, all those physical tools and the quote unquote measurables and all that, he's an incredible athlete, obviously in high school and at Cal, that allows you to become a player that, hey, when I get my 2-dribble pull up going left, now that's a weapon. That's really hard. Hey, when I get my 3-point shooting up to 38%, you add some athleticism and finishing and my physical tools and desire to defend and learn. Hey, now I'm an all-star. And that's a huge difference from all the guys we've seen at that age who kind of look the same-ish on the court, but you have no data off the court, and they just essentially end up fizzling out.
Yeah, and there are a few players that kind of fit this archetype, and I thought about this a lot with Jalen Green specifically at that, like a similar thing. Like a guy, well, he's more of an electric sort of downhill, slippery athlete than Brown, who is explosive, power, just really overwhelming people with his frame, much bigger shoulders. I've been really curious to sort of, and this is something that I did with Green. I don't know how familiar you are with him. Are you familiar with Jalen Green? I'll just ask you point blank.
I saw one clip of Jalen Green this week, and my first thought was, I wonder if J. Kyle Mann thinks this guy's going to be amazing.
He's
one